Good morning and welcome as we continue our journey through the Bible in a year. And today we are having an introduction to the book of Jeremiah. Jeremiah, like Isaiah, who's come just before him, another one of the great prophets and another bit of a chunk of a read. We're going to have at least one more of those as we come to Ezekiel in a couple of books' time. But that's jumping ahead a little bit towards the end of the summer. Jeremiah is the kind of autobiographical book of the prophet Jeremiah and his story and what's happening in the world around him. And it's got some great words of prophecy, some kind of cataclysmic shifts in world power. And the way the world works are happening around the time that Jeremiah is around. The world balances of power are shifting and moving. Kingdoms are in uproar. The nations totter, as David said in the Psalms. That's the kind of time that Jeremiah is writing in. Jeremiah is born into a priestly family around 640 BC in a little town of Anathoth, which is about 12 miles outside of Jerusalem. When he's called by God, he is 14 years old. Those of you who have kids or grandkids who are around that age, just ponder that for a moment. That this man who speaks into the cataclysmic events of world power is not a man when he's called at all. He is a boy when he's called by God in this amazing way. And he's actually not a particularly bold man or boy. He is a kind of timid character, but a phrase that I've heard used to describe him is a timid tornado. Jeremiah is a timid tornado, and he's certainly what he says and the words that he brings from God do bring that kind of incredible, almost landscape altering perspective to the events of the world. Massive things that happen in the time that he is writing. Nineveh is destroyed. You have Babylon and Persia kind of shifting. You have the book of Deuteronomy that we looked at all those weeks and weeks and weeks ago is discovered. It had been lost, and it had been discovered in the reign of King Josiah, and it's kind of the restoration of the law and back to obeying God's commands and so on. All that happens in the time of Jeremiah. But there are some absolutely shifting things that happen in the time of Jeremiah in terms of the perspective of world events. And I just want to highlight a couple of those for us today, because it helps us as we begin to understand what the big picture is and how that affects us today through the story of Jeremiah. The first is that it is the person and not the tribe that is responsible ultimately for their actions before God. So kind of up until this moment in time, you have this idea of collective responsibility, particularly when it comes to sort of sinfulness and God holding people accountable, that it was the people who were responsible for the actions of the individuals, that what the individuals did had a collective responsibility. So if an individual within the people of Israel sinned, it was the people who held that responsibility, and it was the job of the high priest on the Day of Atonement to atone collectively for the sins of the entire people. But what you have when you come to Jeremiah is this idea, this shift towards then personal responsibility. That each and every person is responsible before God for their actions. Sinfulness is about our individual choices and actions rather than this collective responsibility. What you also see is a massive shift, almost to the point where saying these things at the time would have been offensive, deeply offensive to hear for most Jewish people. That almost there is a redefining of some of the central tenets of what they believe. You know, God's salvation plan, which was originally expressed in the freeing of God's people out of slavery in Egypt, shifts a little bit, and there's a focus now towards the fact that God is going to do something new. There's going to be new ways that God delivers his people. It's not just going to be a simple looking back to what God has done in the past, but a looking forward to what God is going to do in the future. And we see that in Jeremiah chapter 16 in verses 14 to 15, and it says, "The days are coming, declares the Lord, when it will no longer be said, as surely as the Lord lives, who brought the Israelites up out of Egypt. But it will be said, as surely as the Lord lives, who brought the Israelites up out of the lands of the north and out of all the other countries that he's banished them, for I will restore the land that I gave to you." So there are new moves afoot of God's rescue of his people. And ultimately, as we saw back in Isaiah in the suffering servant songs, that's going to be ultimately fulfilled later on in Jesus. You have the worship at the temple, which is again changed for away from the old temple in Jerusalem, but now is much more about God's presence being in a godly people. And it says in chapter 7 verses 1 to 15, basically God is saying, you know, you're saying, here is the temple of the Lord, here is the temple of the Lord, but I'm not going to let you live here in my presence unless you start living rightly. You know, it says here in verse 5, if you really change your ways and your actions and you deal with each other justly, if you do not oppress the foreigner, the fatherless or the widow, you do not shed the blood of the innocent, and if you do not follow other gods for your own harm, then I will let you live in this place, in the land that I gave to your ancestors forever and ever. Pause. I am recording this before I go on sabbatical. So it is the 22nd of May, 2024 as I'm recording this, but you are listening to this, maybe some of you, on August the 4th. I have no idea as I record this now what the events of August the 4th are going to be and what has happened in August the 4th. We may well have had a general election by now. There might be a different government talking about kind of big shifts in power. I don't know what's happening in the Middle East either at the time that you are listening to this now. However, as we've said before, the right of God's people to live in the land was always conditional, and we see that here. If you do this, and this, then you can continue to live in the land. But in terms of God's presence and where that is, you know, again, the shift in Jeremiah away from this one physical place to this idea that God's people need to live as his holy people in order for that presence to be there. And again, it's conditional. And if you look at it here in light of what's happening in the world today, do not oppress the foreigner, do not shed innocent blood. You know, these are all things that God's people, right back in Jeremiah, was said, this is how you live as my people. It's not just about a name, it's not just about a place, it's about who you are and how you live in light of the God that I am. You have the Ark of the Covenant, new covenants that are being made. The old covenant is about law and punishment. The new covenant that God is going to be making, we see in Jeremiah 31 to 34. It says, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the people of Israel and with the people of Judah. It will not be like the covenant of their ancestors, where I took them by the hand and I led them out of Egypt, because they broke that covenant, even though I was a husband to them, declares the Lord. This is the covenant I will make with them after that time, declares the Lord, that I will put my law in their minds and I will write it on their hearts, and I will be my God and they will be my people. And they won't need to teach their neighbours, saying, know the Lord, because they will know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their wickedness and remember their sins no more. So we're looking ahead again here in Jeremiah to a new covenant where God is going to forgive the sins and the wickedness and remember those transgressions, the sins of his people no more. Again, ultimately looking forward to what God is doing in Jesus. So in Jeremiah here we have a new exodus that is happening, looking forward to new deliverances that God has given, a focus on how we respond as individuals, living rightly, and a new covenant that is being made by God with his people. And again, this points, doesn't it, I believe, through to what we ultimately see fulfilled in Jesus. So this 14-year-old guy, when he's called by God, 30 years of ministry, still only takes him up to 44, only about 4 years older than me when that ministry finishes, is a timid tornado that is tearing apart the preconceptions of who God's going to be for his people moving forward, and reshaping the landscape of what faith looks like for a people who are desperate to know how God is going to lead them in these cataclysmic times. And for us, we need to know God's presence in these tumultuous times that we live in the light of world events and so on. And so I pray that the words of this timid tornado might stir your heart to look forward and see how God is going to reach into your life and deliver you and lead you and meet with you in new and fresh ways. And that's my prayer for you today.